I had seen the smear of fresh ink on the marriage registry, less than 60 seconds before Joon-hyuk Choi stepped into the dressing room. The air didn't just change, it died. The frantic hushes of the stylists vanished. My father, Mr. Park, who had been packing the silk rug like a caged animal, suddenly went rigid, his spine snapping straight with a terrifying crack of desperation. Even my stepmother, Madam Park, who had spent the last hour sneering at my plain face in the vanity mirror, turned a sickly shade of gray. Then he was there. He didn't just enter a room, he reclaimed it. He was dressed in a black suit that seemed to swallow the light, his skin as pale and cold as winter moonlight, and a dark tattoo snaking up his neck like a warning. But it was his eyes that hit me first, sharp, predatory, scanning the room for the sister who was supposed to be in this dress. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Heat surged through my skin, a traitorous reaction to the sheer, lethal gravity of him. I hated that my body recognized his power before my mind could process the danger. I forced my feet to stay planted, my hands gripping the lace of the veil I hadn't yet lowered. His gaze swept the room, dismissed my father, ignored my stepmother, and locked onto me. My throat tightened. Every instinct I'd honed as the invisible daughter screamed at me to look down, to disappear into the shadows where I was safe. But I had just spent the last minute staring at the empty space where my sister Ara should have been, and the forged signature my father had forced onto the blood debt contract. Something in me, some buried spark of iron, refused to flinch. Hana Park. His voice was a low, melodic growl that vibrated in my chest. It wasn't a question, it was a verdict. Yes, I said. My voice was thin, but it didn't shake. He stepped toward me. 2 men followed, Do-hyun, his right hand, and a massive bodyguard, Seung-ho, flanking him like shadows of death. I couldn't look at them. Joon-hyuk took up every inch of available oxygen in the suite. You're aware of the debt, he said, his eyes narrowing as he took in the cheapness of the lace compared to the wealth of the room. I am now, I replied, my gaze dropping for a split second to the contract on the vanity. His expression shifted, a fractional tightening of his jaw. Now. I picked up the registry, holding it between us like a shield. My sister was supposed to sign this an hour ago. I was told I was the bride exactly 3 minutes ago. The penthouse of the Choi estate smelled of expensive sandalwood and the sharp, ozone tang of an approaching storm. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seoul was a jagged carpet of neon, but inside, the silence was absolute. I stood in the center of the sprawling living area, the heavy silk of the wedding dress feeling less like a garment and more like a shroud. Joon-hyuk didn't look like a groom. He had shed his jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and etched with the same dark, flowing ink that marked his neck. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass, the ice clinking with a rhythmic, lethal precision. The veil was thick, he said, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade through water. He didn't turn around. The lighting in the cathedral was orchestrated for mystery. My men were distracted by the perimeter. He finally turned, the glass held loosely in his hand. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were burning with a quiet, calculated rage. But I have spent 10 years memorizing the scent of the people who owe me. I know the heartbeat of a liar. And you, Hana Park, have been vibrating with terror since the first pew. He moved toward me, his stride predatory. I backed away until the backs of my knees hit the edge of a mahogany desk. He didn't stop until he was inches away, his shadow swallowing me whole. He reached out, his thumb dragging across my lower lip, tracing the path where I'd bitten it raw. Where is Ara? Gone, I whispered, my voice caught in the back of a dry throat. She left this morning. My father, he didn't have the money, he only had me. Joon-hyuk let out a low, humorless bark of a laugh. He set the glass on the desk behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Suddenly, his hand was at my throat, not squeezing, but resting there, a heavy reminder of how easily he could end the charade. Your father traded a thoroughbred for a house pet. He broke a blood debt, Hana. In my world, that is paid in red, not in lace. I looked up at him, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I feared it might bruise. The invisible daughter was supposed to beg. I was supposed to weep. But I thought of my father's cowardice and Ara's smirk, and the spark of iron returned. Ara would have poisoned your drink by the end of the month, I said, my voice gaining a sudden, sharp edge. She was already talking to the Kwons. You didn't buy a bride, Joon-hyuk. You bought a liability. If you kill me now, you prove to every rival in this city that the parks outsmarted you. But if I stay, I can give you the keys to the logistics empire they've been hiding from you. His eyes narrowed, the thumb at my throat stilled. For the first time, he wasn't looking at me like prey. He was looking at me like a problem he hadn't solved yet. Give me one reason, he hissed, why I shouldn't burn that house down tonight with you inside it. Because, I breathed, my hand covering his on my neck, I'm the only one in that house who actually wants you to win. The morning sun in the Choi mansion didn't bring warmth. It only illuminated the cold, clinical perfection of a fortress. I woke in a bed large enough for 3 people, the silk sheets a mocking reminder of a wedding night spent in separate rooms. By the time I reached the breakfast hall, the air was already thick with the scent of bitter tea and unspoken threats. At the head of the table sat Madame Choi. She didn't look up from her porcelain cup, her silver hair pulled back into a knot so tight it seemed to pull the skin of her face into a mask of permanent disapproval. To her left stood Do-hyun, Joon-hyuk's right-hand man. He was a shadow in a charcoal suit, his arms crossed, his eyes tracking my every movement with the clinical detachment of a man deciding where to place a bullet. The help informed me you required assistance with the traditional hanbok, Madame Choi said, her voice like dry parchment. She finally looked at me, her gaze raking over my simple blouse and slacks. My son's wife should at least know how to dress herself. But then, we weren't expecting the quiet daughter, were we? I pulled out a chair, the screech of wood against marble echoing too loudly. The quiet ones usually see the things everyone else misses, madam. Do-hyun stepped forward, his presence a wall of silent hostility. Seeing is one thing, Mrs. Choi. Survival is another. This household runs on loyalty and precision. You are a variable we didn't account for. Variables are usually eliminated to maintain the equation. I met his stare. He wanted me to flinch, to show the cracks my father and Ara had spent years widening. Instead, I picked up a silver spoon, my reflection distorted in its polished surface. I'm not a variable, Do-hyun. I'm the correction to a mistake my sister was planning to make. If you were as observant as you claim, you would have noticed the discrepancies in the Park family's shipping manifests months ago. The room went still. Madame Choi set her cup down with a sharp clack. Do-hyun's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his stoic face before it was replaced by a deeper, more dangerous suspicion. You speak of business you don't understand, he hissed. I understand that a logistics company doesn't lose 3 containers of high-end electronics in a single month without someone inside opening the doors, I replied, my voice steady. My sister wasn't just running away from a marriage. She was running away from an audit. Madame Choi leaned back, her sharp eyes studying me with a new, icy curiosity. You have a bold tongue for a girl who was traded like a piece of livestock. I wasn't traded, I said, rising from the table without having tasted a bite. I was invested, and I intend to make sure my husband gets a return on that investment. As I walked out, I felt Do-hyun's gaze burning into my back. I wasn't the empress yet, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't a ghost either. The library in the Choi estate was a tomb of dark oak and leather-bound secrets, but the real ghosts were hidden inside the glowing screens of the dual monitors. Joon-hyuk had granted me access, a test, I suspected, to the digital ledgers of the logistics wing. He likely expected me to drown in the sea of numbers, but he didn't realize that for years, I had been the one cleaning up my father's sloppy arithmetic in the middle of the night. Hours bled into the evening. My neck ached, and the blue light burned my eyes, but I didn't stop. I navigated through layers of encrypted subfiles, my fingers flying across the keys with a muscle memory that felt like a weapon. The shipping log seemed perfect on the surface, standard fuel surcharges, insurance premiums, and port fees. But there was a rhythmic pulse in the data that felt wrong. Every 3rd Tuesday, a small percentage of damaged cargo was written off from the Incheon terminal. It was a rounding error, really, less than 0.5% of the total volume. To a man like Joon-hyuk, who dealt in billions, it was invisible. To a woman who had spent a decade making ends meet on a ghost employee's pittance, it screamed. I traced the digital trail. The damaged goods weren't being destroyed. They were being transferred to a shell company registered as Blue Horizon Trading. I dug deeper, bypassing 3 firewalls until I found the payout structure. The money wasn't staying in the Park family's failing accounts. It was being diverted into a private offshore fund. The door behind me creaked. I didn't turn around. The heavy, metallic scent of Joon-hyuk's cologne told me exactly who was standing in the shadows. "My mother tells me you spent your morning insulted by the tea and your afternoon hiding in the dark," he said, his voice a low vibration in the quiet room. He walked toward the desk, his presence narrowing the world down to the space between us. "Found any poetry in the shipping costs?" I stepped aside, gesturing to the screen. "Not poetry, a leak." I pointed to the Blue Horizon entries. "Someone is skimming from your Incheon shipments. They've been doing it for 18 months. It started small, but the frequency is increasing. Over $4 million has vanished into this account." Joon-hyuk leaned over, his hand resting on the back of my chair, his chest nearly brushing my shoulder. I could feel the heat radiating from him. He studied the numbers, his jaw tightening as the logic of the theft clicked into place. "This is Do-hyun's sector," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "It's not just theft," I said, looking up at him. Our faces were inches apart, and for a second the ledgers didn't matter. "The dates of these transfers align with every time my sister, coincidentally, met with your rivals. This isn't just a ghost account, Joon-hyuk. It's a war chest, and someone in this house is helping her fill it." The gala was a sea of false smiles and lethal intentions. Crystal chandeliers cast a sharp, cold light over the viper's nest, as the elite of Seoul's underworld gathered to scrutinize the new Choi bride. I stood at Joon-hyuk's side, my hand resting on the sleeve of his dinner jacket. He was a pillar of dark gravity, radiating a power that kept the room at a distance, yet I could feel the tension in his arm, a coiled spring waiting for a snap. Seung-ho, the massive bodyguard, shadowed us like a silent monolith. His eyes never rested, scanning the waitstaff and the balconies with a rhythmic, mechanical precision. "Stay close," Joon-hyuk murmured, his voice barely audible over the string quartet. "And don't drink anything you didn't see poured." "I'm more worried about the shadows than the wine," I replied, my gaze drifting to the far corner of the ballroom. I noticed him then, a server with a gait that was too heavy, his eyes fixed not on the trays, but on the height of Joon-hyuk's chest. As the man approached, his hand didn't reach for a glass. It disappeared into the folds of his white linen jacket. Time slowed to a crawl. I didn't think. I acted on an instinct honed by years of surviving the volatile tempers of the Park household. As the silver glint of a silenced barrel emerged, I didn't scream. I slammed my body into Joon-hyuk's side, using my momentum to shove him toward the cover of a marble pillar. Thwip. The sound was pathetic, a dull puff of air, but the mirror behind where Joon-hyuk had been standing shattered into 1,000 jagged diamonds. "Down," Seung-ho roared. Before the assassin could realign his sights, I grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from a nearby table and hurled it with every ounce of my desperation. It didn't hit the man, but it shattered at his feet, sending him stumbling back on the slick, alcohol-drenched floor. That second was all Seung-ho needed. He moved with a speed that defied his size, a blur of black cloth and violence, disarming the man with a sickening crack of bone. The ballroom erupted into chaos, but Joon-hyuk's hands were already on my shoulders, pulling me up. His face was a mask of thunderous rage, yet his grip was unexpectedly steady. He searched my eyes, looking for the break, the sob, the collapse. He found only the same iron focus that had uncovered his stolen millions. Seung-ho stepped back from the unconscious attacker, his chest heaving. He looked at the shattered decanter, then at the bruised spot on my shoulder where I'd hit the pillar. For the first time, the giant didn't look through me. He gave a single, sharp nod, a silent acknowledgement that I was no longer just a liability to be guarded. I was a teammate. You saved him, Seung-ho said, his voice a low rumble of newfound respect. Joon-hyuk didn't say a word, but his hand slid down to grip mine, his fingers interlacing with mine so tightly it hurt. It wasn't a gesture of comfort, it was a claim. The scent of expensive, cloying lilies preceded her entrance, a floral shroud that always signaled a coming storm. I was in the private conservatory, the glass walls sweating with the humidity of the tropical plants, when Madame Park stepped out of the shadows. She looked immaculate in her charcoal silk suit, but her eyes were those of a vulture circling a fresh kill. You look surprisingly comfortable in another woman's life, Hana, she said, her voice a sharp contrast to the soft rustle of the palms. She didn't wait for an invitation to sit. She simply claimed the wicker chair opposite me, her gaze lingering on the diamond band Joon-hyuk had placed on my finger. I didn't rise. I didn't offer her tea. The life was vacant, Mother. I simply filled the silence Ara left behind. Madame Park leaned forward, her red lips curving into a predatory smile. Ara didn't just leave a vacancy. She left a debt. Your father's logistics empire is bleeding, and the interest on his blood loan is due. I'm here for the first installment of your gratitude. I don't owe you gratitude, I said, my voice as cold as the marble floor. I was sold to keep your biological daughter from a grave. That transaction is closed. Is it? She reached into her clutch and pulled out a single, grainy photograph. It was a shot of the wedding registry, the ink still wet, the signature clearly showing the hesitant slant of my handwriting next to Ara's printed name. This little forgery is the only thing keeping Joon-hyuk from burning our house down. But I wonder, how would Chairman Kwon feel if he knew the Choi Park alliance was built on a lie? He's been looking for a reason to declare war. I think he'd pay handsomely for the truth. The air in the conservatory grew stifling. If Chairman Kwon received that proof, Joon-hyuk's reputation would be shattered, and my life, along with my father's, would end before the sun set. You're blackmailing your own daughter to fund your daughter's escape, I whispered. I'm securing my future, she corrected, her eyes hard. $10 million, Hana, transferred to the Blue Horizon account by tomorrow night, or I take a trip to the Kwon estate. Choose carefully. You've played the Empress for a week, but don't forget you're still just a girl in a stolen dress. She stood to leave, the clicking of her heels a rhythmic countdown to my destruction. I watched her go, my heart a frantic bird in a cage of ribs. She thought she had me cornered. She didn't realize that by mentioning Blue Horizon, she had just handed me the very rope I needed to hang her. The Kwon estate was a brutalist monument of concrete and glass perched on the edge of a jagged cliff, overlooking a sea that looked like churning ink. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of expensive tobacco and the clinical chill of air conditioning. Chairman Kwon sat behind a desk of polished obsidian, his face a map of old scars and new ambitions. Joon-hyuk led me into the room, his hand firm on the small of my back. He moved with the lethal grace of a tiger entering a rival's territory, but I could feel the microscopic tension in his muscles. We were in the dragon's den, and every shadow held a man with a gun. Joon-hyuk, Kwon rasped, his eyes sliding over me with a nauseating, slow burn. I heard you traded a wild cat for a house pet. I didn't believe it until I saw the wedding photos. She looks fragile. She's quiet, Joon-hyuk replied, his voice a low, warning growl. Quiet water runs deep, Chairman. Don't mistake peace for weakness. As they began to discuss the shipping routes, the very same routes I had discovered were being bled dry. My gaze drifted to the man standing in the corner. He was young, dressed in a sharp, unremarkable suit, but he stood with a practiced stillness that marked him as more than a mere soldier. My breath hitched. I recognized that jawline from a crumpled photo I'd found in Ara's vanity. It was Min-ho, the secret lover Ara had supposedly fled with. I didn't let my expression change. I leaned in toward Joon-hyuk, playing the role of the devoted, submissive wife, while my eyes remained locked on the reflection in the obsidian desk. Chairman Kwon reached for a gold lighter, and as he flicked the flame, he made a quick, sharp gesture with his left hand, 2 fingers tapping against his signet ring. In the corner, Min-ho responded instantly, adjusting his cufflink in a way that was too deliberate to be a habit. It was a signal, a confirmation of readiness. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Ara hadn't run away to be with her lover. She had run to Chairman Kwon. The theft through Blue Horizon wasn't just greed. It was the down payment for an assassination. My sister hadn't just abandoned me to this marriage. She was actively working to make sure I became a widow before the month was out. I felt Joon-hyuk's fingers tighten against my waist, sensing my shift in mood. I looked up at him, injecting a soft, feigned tiredness into my eyes. "The sea air is making me a bit lightheaded, darling," I murmured, my voice loud enough for Kwon to hear. Joon-hyuk's eyes searched mine, seeing the silent fire behind the facade. "We're finished here anyway," he said, standing up. As we walked out, I didn't look back at the dragon or the traitor in the corner. I had seen enough. The viper wasn't just in the nest, it was at the gate. The drive back from the Kwon estate was a suffocating vacuum. Rain began to lash against the armored glass of the sedan, blurring the neon lights of Seoul into streaks of violent red and blue. Joon-hyuk sat in the corner of the seat, a shadow carved from stone, his jaw set in a line so hard it looked painful. Neither of us spoke until we reached the penthouse. The moment the door clicked shut behind us, the silence broke. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. He didn't turn to look at me as he unbuttoned his cuffs. "You didn't get lightheaded from the sea air, Hana. You saw a ghost." "Minho," I breathed, the name tasting like copper in my mouth. "The man in the corner. He's the one Ara left with. But he wasn't her escape, Joon-hyuk. He's her handler. She's at the Kwon estate, and they've been using the money stolen from your shipments to buy the very guns that will be pointed at your chest." Joon-hyuk froze. He finally turned, his eyes searching mine with a raw intensity that made me want to recoil and step closer all at once. For the first time. The mask of the cold Mafia boss slipped. Behind it was a man who had spent his entire life surrounded by people waiting for him to bleed so they could take his throne. "I expected betrayal from the Parks," he whispered, stepping into my space. "I expected it from Kwon, but I thought I was the one holding all the pieces." "You were," I said, reaching out. My fingers brushed the back of his hand, trembling slightly. "But you were playing a game of chess while they were burning the board. They don't want your territory, Joon-hyuk. They want your extinction." He looked down at my hand, then back at my face. The predatory glint was gone, replaced by a haunting vulnerability. He reached out, his large hand cupping the side of my face, his thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone with a tenderness that felt more terrifying than his rage. "Everyone I've ever let close has had a price tag," he said, his voice cracking. "My mother, Do-hyun, Ara, I bought you to settle a debt. I treated you like a transaction." "I know," I replied, leaning into his touch. "But a transaction doesn't save your life at a gala. A transaction doesn't hunt through your ledgers until her eyes bleed. I'm not here because of my father's debt anymore." He leaned down, his forehead resting against mine. The scent of sandalwood and rain enveloped me. In the quiet of the penthouse, the blood bond wasn't about the contract or the forced marriage. It was the realization that in a world of vipers, we were the only two people who spoke the same language of survival. "I didn't need a bride," he murmured against my skin. "I needed a partner." He didn't kiss me then, but the way he held me, as if I were the only thing keeping him grounded in a storm, was a deeper confession than any words. The grand ballroom was a cathedral of glass and gold, shimmering with the dangerous elegance of Seoul's elite. I moved through the crowd at Joon-hyuk's side, the weight of his hand on my waist no longer a restraint, but an anchor. We were walking into a trap, and for the first time, I wasn't the bait, I was the hunter. The music faltered as the grand doors swung open. A woman stood there, draped in crimson silk that demanded every eye in the room. It was Ara. She looked radiant, her face a mask of righteous indignation as she swept toward us, followed by a murmur of shocked recognition. "Stop this charade," Ara's voice rang out, sharp and melodic, cutting through the hushed whispers. She stopped inches from us, her eyes flashing with a practiced cruelty. "Joon-hyuk, you've been deceived. This girl isn't the bride you were promised. She's a ghost, a fraud who stole my place while I was being held against my will." She turned to the crowd, her hand trembling with feigned emotion. "This is Hana Park, my sister. She conspired with our father to replace me so she could climb into a life she never deserved. Look at her. She's a liar wearing a stolen crown." The room erupted into a low roar of scandal. Beside me, I felt the air around Joon-hyuk turn to ice. Do-hyun moved instinctively forward, his hand drifting toward his jacket, but I stepped out from Joon-hyuk's shadow, my heels clicking firmly against the marble. "You're right about one thing, Ara," I said, my voice calm and resonant. "I did take your place, but I didn't steal it. I inherited the wreckage you left behind." I reached into the clutch I had been holding and pulled out a sleek, obsidian tablet. With a flick of my finger, the massive digital displays surrounding the ballroom flickered, replacing the floral arrangements with a series of bank statements and encrypted chat logs. "While you were supposedly being held, you were busy," I continued, my gaze never leaving hers. "These are the records for the Blue Horizon account. Over $4 million diverted from Choi Logistics into a fund managed by Chairman Kwon's associates. And here," I swiped to the next slide, "are the messages between you and Minho detailing Joon-hyuk's security protocols for the night of the assassination attempt." Ara's face drained of color, the crimson of her dress now making her look like a ghost. The murmurs turned from scandal to a deadly, focused silence. "You didn't come here to reclaim your life," I whispered, stepping close enough to smell her cloying perfume. "You came here to watch the execution you paid for, but the only thing being buried tonight, sister, is your seat at this table." Joon-hyuk stepped up behind me, his presence a dark, immovable wall. He didn't look at Ara, he looked at the room, his silence more terrifying than any threat. "The contract has been fulfilled," he announced, his voice like rolling thunder. "My wife has spoken." The aftermath of the gala was not a celebration. It was a reckoning. While the city slept, the Choi estate transformed into a command center of cold efficiency. The neon lights of the penthouse felt like laboratory lights, stark and unforgiving, as the viper's nest was finally cleansed of its true pests. Do-hyun was the first to fall. Confronted with the digital trail Hana had excavated, his stoic mask shattered into a frantic plea for mercy that Joon-hyuk silenced with a single, icy glance. By dawn, the Blue Horizon accounts were frozen, and the Park family's logistics empire was no longer a failing business. It was a subsidiary of the Choi crown. Ara and her mother were gone, cast out into a world where they no longer had a name or a fortune to shield them. I stood on the balcony, watching the sun bleed over the Han River. The heavy wedding lace was gone, replaced by a sharp, tailored suit that fit the woman I had become. The invisible daughter was dead. In her place stood someone who had looked into the heart of a monster and found a reflection. The glass door slid open behind me. Joon-hyuk didn't sneak. His presence was a weight I had learned to welcome. He stood beside me, the wind ruffling his dark hair, his silhouette no longer a threat but a sanctuary. "Chairman Kwon has retreated to his island," Joon-hyuk said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "He knows the alliance is no longer a lie. He knows that to touch the Parks is to invite a war with me." "And the contract?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the horizon. "The debt is paid. The logistics are secure. My father is safe from his own stupidity." Joon-hyuk reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, the original marriage addendum, the one with my father's desperate forgery. Without a word, he produced a lighter. The flame caught quickly, the edges of the paper curling into black ash that the wind snatched away. "The contract is gone," he whispered. "You are no longer a debt collector, Hana. You are no longer bound by your father's fear or my mother's judgment." He turned to me, his hand finding mine. His grip was firm, his thumb tracing the space where a ring had once been a shackle. "I told you I needed a partner," he said, his eyes searching mine with a terrifying, beautiful sincerity. "Not a bride I bought, but a woman I chose. Stay, not because you have to, but because this empire is as much yours as it is mine." I looked at his hand in mine, then up at the man who had seen my iron before I even knew it existed. I wasn't the sacrificial lamb anymore. I was the matriarch. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice echoing with a strength that would never be silenced again. We have a reign to begin.